Hello and welcome to yet another NuclearCraft Spotlight. Today we're looking at the new radiation system. It was added a few versions back, I think 2.11a maybe, and it aims to sort of add a Fallout style radiation system to the game. It's aimed to be something you need to think about but nothing to worry about all the time, and by default it is disabled. That's the first thing to say, is if you want to actually enable this and play with radiation, you're going to have to head into the configs and enable it up here. And once you've done that, then all the radiation stuff will be added to the mod, and you can start playing with it. So, first of all, let's talk about exactly how you get irradiated, because obviously that's where the problem comes from. Lots of items will be radioactive. So, for example, if we type in uranium, and we head across to where some actual uranium stuff is, you'll see that if we hover over various uranium stuff, such as this block of uranium-238, you'll see there in yellow, radiation, we get 3 nanorads per tick. So the rad is the sort of Fallout unit of radiation, and if you hit 1,000 rads, then your player dies. That's a fatal amount of radiation. Of course, as you can see up there, there's like Radaway and stuff and Radex to protect yourself against that, but we'll get to that in a second. So uranium has radiation, thorium does as well. If we type in NuclearCraft, this is where most of the radioactive stuff is probably. You can see there's a bunch of IC2 stuff that gives you some rads. There it gives me 48 picораds. That's 1/1,000,000th of a microrad, so that's very, very small amount. That's why it's in white. So the color gives you an indication of how dangerous it is. So the ores and stuff aren't too dangerous. Thorium is a little bit more dangerous than uranium, as you can see. But when you go down the fuel chain to these really, really heavy metals, these heavy fuels and heavy isotopes, you can see some of them are in red, such as the curium-243. And some of them are in dark red, such as some of these fuels that are really highly radioactive. So that's 1 rad per tick. So if you held that for 1,000 ticks, you would die. By default, anyway. As I said, there's a way to protect yourself against it. So you'll notice that, first of all, if I actually just hold some radioactive material in my hand, so let's just hold something that's vaguely radioactive. Let's go with this Neptunium. If I hold this in my hand, you'll notice that, first of all, I get a sweet Neptune achievement, but more importantly, I don't actually really notice anything. I don't notice my character sort of being irradiated. I don't hear anything, and that's because if you want to actually look at your current rad count and the current radiation you're experiencing, you're going to have to get yourself a Geiger counter. So Geiger counter pretty easy to make. I won't look through all the recipes of all this stuff because you can just look at them yourself. And as soon as you put the Geiger counter anywhere in your inventory, you'll get a little bar down there that it's a bit difficult to see on sand, isn't it? But you can see, if I go over to the grass, it's a little bit easier to see there, that it says 7 microrads per tick. So that's not very much radiation, but it's enough to be worried about. If I put this on my hotbar, you'll start to hear some ticks. I'll turn up my sound a little bit as well. I think I turned it down in the last video. You'll start to hear some ticking. And that's because I'm being irradiated by this Neptunium that I'm holding. So that's giving me, at the moment, that's a stack of it, so that's 64 times the base, which was 6, and that's giving me a total of 416 microrads per tick. As soon as I take that off, you'll see that the amount of radiation I'm getting is slowly going down, but it's not going down to 0. And the reason that is because not only was the Neptunium irradiating me, but it was also irradiating the landscape. And that's sort of the big thing about this radiation mechanism, is that the landscape can be irradiated, and radiation will spread from chunk to chunk. So that's the thing you've got to be worried about. If you throw some radioactive materials on the ground, like that, you'll see that my radiation count's actually going up. So it's going 14, 19, 23, and that's because this plutonium on the ground is actually irradiating this chunk. And if I pick it up, I get even more radiation because now I'm holding it as well. So there's 27 microrads here. If I travel to a nearby chunk, you saw there it dropped. So it's gone down to 4 microrads. If I head a bit further out, then it will drop down to 1. If I head even further out from where I dropped that plutonium, it goes down to 593 nanorads. So you can see that the source was over there, and the radiation is starting to spread out across the world, slowly but surely. So you've got to be careful not to drop too much really highly radioactive stuff on the ground, otherwise you will irradiate the land. And of course, any mobs in the irradiated land as well will be irradiated. So pigs and cows and all that sort of stuff will be hurt if they get too much radiation. And mobs will actually get buffed. So the more irradiated they are, they will actually get buffed. So zombies and creepers will start to get resistance, damage resistance, and haste and jumping ability and stuff like that. So do be very careful. Now, how to remove your rads. So first of all, let's get really, really irradiated. Let's pick something up that's really, really bad. Something like this HEA242 oxide fuel. If I hold this in my inventory, you'll see it tells me it's really, really bad. This stuff is really, really radioactive. And if I right-click my Geiger counter, you'll see that I'm getting 39 millirads per tick, and it tells me that my current rad count is 5 rads, which is 0% of my total, but it's starting to go up. So you can see I've got 12 rads, 13, 14. Let's actually get a few more in my inventory, and you'll start to see the count go up. And you'll also hear the Geiger counter start to go crazy. So you can see I'm starting to get a lot of rads now. Slowly but surely that bar will fill up, head towards 100%. Now, as I head closer and closer towards 100%, I will start to actually get some debuffs. So once I hit 40%, I believe, we'll have to see. I can't actually remember. Let's just wait a second. So now I'm at 35. You can see that colour started to go a bit wonky. So I'm actually going to go into survival. So you can see there that I've actually got weakness. That thing's hiding it a bit. I've got weakness. Then I went 40. Now I'm at 50. So it looks like 40% was weakness. I think 55 gives you mining fatigue. So 55 mining fatigue. I think maybe the next one is something like 65, perhaps. No, maybe 70. So at 70, I've now got hunger. And then I'm going to get something else. I'm going to have to go into... so now I've got some really bad stuff. So it looked like it was poison there. And then if I go on to 95% or 90%, it gives me withering. So as you get more and more irradiated, you get worse and worse status effects. So now that I'm incredibly irradiated, I'm going to get myself some Radaway. So Radaway is made with various things like glowing mushrooms and such. And if you hover over here, it says by default it removes 300 rads, which is 30% of my total rad count. And if I use one, you'll see that my rads will start to go down a little bit. And if I use another one, it will go down again. I can actually use them in succession, and the sort of effect will stack. So I've gone all the way down to 0 rads again. So that was an easy way of getting rid of my radiation. Now, as you saw there, when I was holding that fuel, so let's actually hold something that's dangerous like this. 1 rad per tick. So you'll see this gives me 1 rad per tick, which is very dangerous. But if I get some Radex and drink it, you'll see that the number of rads I'm receiving has gone right down to 159, 130. If I drink another one, it goes down to 75. Another one, it goes down to 52. So this Radex actually stacks, and for every one I have, it gives me a radiation resistance of 25. Now, the equation for working out exactly how many rads you get, based on your radiation resistance, I'll put up on the screen. It's pretty simple. It's based on the Fallout 4 one. But you'll notice here that it gives me the effect for 10 minutes, but if it is stacked, like I just have, then the high levels of radiation resistance will actually wear off more quickly. So if I drink more and more Radex, my radiation resistance will go up more and more, but it will go down faster. So you can see now that my radiation per tick is actually going up slowly because the resistance is wearing off. So that's how to use Radex. It's a sort of quick way to get a lot of radiation resistance. If you need some slightly more permanent protection, then if you put yourself a hazmat suit on, then you will see that the amount of radiation I'm getting, it just went down from 909 millirads all the way down to 49. That's because each piece of this hazmat suit actually gives me radiation resistance. So this gives me 2, this gives me 3, this gives me 2, this gives me 2, for a total of 11 for the hazmat suit. And you can see that's massively decreased the amount of radiation I'm receiving. So that's really useful for when you're heading into a region or an area which is incredibly dangerous. If we take this off, you'll see we go all the way up to 900-ish again. But I've also added it so that the IC2 hazmat suit will also give you radiation resistance. The rubber boots will not, though. So it doesn't give you quite as much by default, but you can see it still does a pretty good job. So that's the first option, is to just wear hazmat suits. So they give you a lot of radiation resistance. Let's actually get a bit of Radaway here just to bring this back down. The other option is to add radiation shielding to armor. So instead of just having to wear a hazmat suit the whole time, you can take your existing armor and actually apply some radiation shielding to it. So there are 3 tiers. The first tier is for incredibly light level stuff. This is for when you're basically going mining, collecting uranium ore. This stuff will protect you pretty well against that level of radiation. So you can apply this light radiation shielding, and as you can see there, it gives me this iron chest plate with a bit of radiation resistance. The medium level stuff is good for when you're sort of hanging around nuclear reactors and stuff, the sort of general sort of vague amounts of radiation that you get from hanging around radioactive machines. And again, mining is pretty good at protecting against that sort of stuff. and you can see it gives me a bit more radiation resistance than before. And then finally, the really heavy duty stuff, heavy radiation shielding. This is for when you want to go into dangerous, highly radioactive places, maybe like the nuclear wasteland or whatever. So as you can see, that gives me a whole 1 radiation resistance, which is pretty good. And as you can see, it works on things like dark boots, which have like other, weird effects on them. So there we go. That's radiation shielding. And if I put it on, you can see because I'm in creator mode, I didn't die because I hit maximum rads. But at the moment, I'm at 752 millirads. When I put this iron chest plate on, it went down a tiny bit, but hardly anything because it doesn't really do that much. This went down from 750 to 730 when I put the medium on, but when I put these boots on, it should protect me quite a lot. So I go down to 209, 208. So that heavy stuff is really, really useful. I'll put the scoop helmet on to sort of even give a bit more. So I've gone all the way down from about 800 to 86 by using that shielding. So it's pretty good. Well, actually, it's 200 using that shielding. So there we are. So you can either use a hazmat suit, or you can use some radiation shielding added to armor. So that's pretty much everything you can do to protect yourself, at least a player. There's one more way to deal with radiation, and that's to use radiation scrubbers. So radiation scrubbers are pretty expensive. They require some pretty advanced stuff, but if you look at the details here, it says here that it will reduce the radiation level of the chunk it is placed in. Its effectiveness is dependent on the amount of free space around it. So it needs a little bit of power, and it will actually lower the amount of radiation in the area. Now, the more sort of free space this thing has, the more effective it will be. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just build a little tower here and put it up here. So sort of the more free space it has, the better. As you can see, it actually needs a little bit of power. So I'm going to just give it an RTG. Let's put it there. So we're at 134 millirads at the moment. Let's just see how effective this is. Let's put a few more down. This one won't be quite as effective, but let's just put it down there, and let's put another one maybe over here. So let's try that. And after a few seconds, these things will actually start to work. So you can see here that this thing is really, really effective because it's sort of in an area that isn't covered by anything. As you can see there, the actual radiation level is going down, and it's gone down all the way down to 23 now. And this thing is removing 25 millirads per tick from the area. This thing is not quite as effective because it's near the ground, but you can see it's still 59% efficient, removing 40 millirads per tick. And this thing over here is also removing about 60% of its maximum at 40 millirads per tick. So in total, these things are removing... Oh, you can see there it went down a little bit, and I think that's because these radiation scrubbers will actually share area, and if they overlap, then they will actually decrease the efficiency somewhat of each other. So do be careful about that. The best thing to do is space these out as much as you can and have them in as free an area as you can. And these things will be very effective at removing radiation. It removes 25 millirads per tick at max, which is very, very good for dealing with radiation produced by nuclear reactors and things like that, but really, really not very good at clearing out radiation in really heavily irradiated places like wastelands. So yeah, those are useful in some cases, other times they're not, and they are quite expensive, so do keep that in mind. So that's sort of every way to deal with radiation that there is, and we've talked about how to actually get radiation. There are a lot of configurable options here for making a slightly more nuanced experience. So if we head into the config here, you will notice that there are a bunch of configs, lots of stuff to do with just how fast everything spreads, your maximum player rads, how fast things spread from chunk to chunk, the sort of lowest amount of radiation that sort of moves around, and things like that, the amount of rads that rad area moves, etc, etc, etc. But the ones that you can actually configure the most are these ones, first of all, here. So first of all, world background radiation. So this here, you list the dimensions where radiation exists, so across the whole dimension. It's like a background radiation. So for example here I've got dimension 4598, which is the nuclear wasteland dimension, which will be used soon to do various things, and you can see here that the actual background radiation is 2.25, which is very, very high. So you can add other worlds here, like the overworld or the nether or something, for example. Then you've got biome background radiation. Here you actually just list the biomes, so by default I've just got the NuclearCraft nuclear wasteland, and that has a background radiation of 250 millirads, which is still pretty dangerous. Ore stack radiation, here what you do is you add ore dictionary entries, so things like ingot gold or whatever, if you want that to be radioactive, or ingot whatever, ingot plutonium is added by default, but there'll be a bunch of other materials that aren't added by default, which you may want to add radiation to, and here you add their ordict entries. You can actually do it by item stack, so if you've got a particular item stack, so here we've got all the IC2 sort of nuclear items and all their various amounts of radiation. Don't worry about the funny numbers, that's just the numbers they came out as when I was doing the calculations for how much they should add. The reason I had to add these by item stack is because they don't have an ordict entry. Oh, my mouse just spazzed out there. So yeah, item stacks. You can also do the same with blocks. So if you have some particular blocks that you want to add radiation to, that's not in world, by the way. That's when they're in your inventory. Then you can add them here. Then down here, you have more options to do with the shielding. So first of all, do you want to turn on the shielding recipes at all? You can turn them off. The shielding item blacklist, this is the items that shouldn't be given shielding recipes. So for example, the hazmat recipes should not be given any shielding recipes, because obviously you can't add more shielding to hazmat. That would be absurd, that would be too overpowered. But you can see here I've also added 2 more custom options, leather chestplate and leather boots. So if I head into the configs here, if I head into the crafting table here, and I get some leather boots, so I get on my leather armor quickly, and I go into here and get some shielding. Let's just get any old shielding. You can see here that the boots don't work because I've disabled them, but the leggings should work. The leggings work fine. The chestplate doesn't work because I disabled it, and the cap works fine. So you can actually disable particular armor that you don't want to work in there. The other thing you can do is you can actually add more armor here by item stack. If for some reason it doesn't get added, the recipe doesn't get added, you can add them here. And also because you have to remove them by item here, you can't include the metadata in this blacklist. You may want to add particular metadata items back in this list. So unfortunately there's no real way I can get around that. If you only want particular metadata of particular armor to get added, then you will have to remove it and then add the particular ones back. So that's just how it works. And then the default armor shielding, so here is basically the default levels. So you can see here the hazmat suit default levels that we saw earlier. And also here I've got this dark steel chestplate. I've given it 0.438 radiation resistance. So if we head into this thing here, you can see it's got, oh, it's spazzing out a bit. You can see here radiation resistance 0.438. So that's a way of giving sort of a hazmat feel to some of the armor that you've got. If you want particular armor sets to have natural radiation resistance, you can do it that way. Of course, I can actually still add radiation resistance to this thing because I didn't disable it. So now I've got 1.438 resistance on this dark plate because it has the natural 0.438 plus the 1 from the heavy radiation shielding. Let's see, is there anything else in here that we need to talk about? I'm not sure if there is much. I think everything else is pretty self-explanatory. Hardcore stacks, what this does is it will, if you turn that off, it will disable items in the player's inventory also irradiating the chunk the player is in, so that's what we saw earlier. Death persistence, when you die, will the radiation stay there? That's whether you die by radiation or not. If you die by radiation, then it will always get rid of all your radiation that you had, but if you, say, just get killed by a monster or whatever, will the radiation stay with the player when they die? And if they do, then exactly how much stays. Radiation HUD stuff, so where it appears on the heads-up display, where that Geiger counter information appears. So at the moment I've got it sat down there, but if I go into configs and head down here, and I change this, so at the moment this is the angle relative to north, so this would be 0. I don't know if you can actually see my mouse, but if you can, this would be 45, 90, and then 225 is down the bottom left corner. So say if I wanted it to be in, say, the bottom right corner instead for some reason, that would be 135 degrees, and I go, there it is, so you can see down there, it's down the bottom right. And then the final thing maybe to say is if you head down here, counter required for info, so if you turn this off, then the Geiger counter and the overlay will show even if you don't have the Geiger counter actually on your inventory. So that's if you're wanting to make a real proper Fallout style experience. There's a guy called Skull Hunter that's making an actual sort of Fallout mod pack, which is pretty cool. So stuff like that, that's when you want to turn that to false. And if you actually want to be a little bit more specific about where the information appears, then you can use this. You just put 2 numbers in and it will tell you exactly the coordinates on the screen where it will be. But otherwise just use this angle thing, it's a lot easier. But anyway, that's pretty much everything to do with the radiation. The main things to know is that it can spread from chunk to chunk. When you hold it, it's going to irradiate you. You can protect yourself with radiation and Radex, radiation shielding and Radex. You can get rid of it with Radaway, and if you head into particular biomes and particular worlds, it will be highly radioactive, and you're going to have to want to wear some like really protective stuff. And of course, finally, you can remove radiation from the world using these scrubbers. So if you have any questions, that might have been a bit quick, but I don't think there's really much more to say about this. I'd rather have everyone sort of play with it and see what they find about this system. If you do have any questions, of course, as usual, ask in the comments, or head into our Discord server and chat with all the awesome people in there. So thank you all very much for watching. Next is to look at the molten salt reactors and heat exchangers, which were recently added. That's two really big features actually that will be pretty cool. So I'll get into that in the next video, and I'll see you then. Thank you very much.